Fair Oaks Ranch Incident. On the 28th of February 1976, 6 cave explorers searched for a new cave entrance in Texas. None had vertical training or knew how to safely rig ropes. They found a pit opening and rigged a homemade rope ladder 60 feet down. One descended and found a second pit dropping another 50 feet. The ladder only reached 10 feet into the second drop. Jim Beal, 27 years old, climbed down with only a flashlight, no helmet, no harness, no safety equipment. There was no belay system. About 15 feet from the top, he lost his grip and a rung broke. Jim fell, hit the chamber floor, and rolled over the edge of the second pit. He fell 50 feet in free fall, totaling about 65 feet. Incredibly, he was alive and conscious, but the group didn't have equipment to reach him. An hour and a half later, rescuers arrived with a medic. The medic found Jim conscious and talking but badly injured. They strapped him to a wooden backboard with rope and steel cable. As they lifted Jim vertically head up, he passed out from blood loss. The stretcher rose 50 feet but hung up on the pit lip. People kept pulling and the rope began to fray and broke. The steel cable then tore through the wooden backboard. Jim fell back down the 50-foot pit for the second time. This time the impact killed him. Jim should have survived the initial fall, but the rescue used poor equipment and improper technique. Lifting him vertically with internal bleeding reduced blood flow to his brain. The inappropriate equipment failed under stress. Chakra Mountain Cave Incident. Bora was a guano collector in Thailand who harvested bat droppings from caves. He prepared for what he thought would be a routine 3-day expedition. He packed a flashlight, water, dried rice, and cloth sacks. Chakra Mountain's cave system extended over 2 miles through limestone. Bora's destination was 1,200 feet deep, where massive bat colonies roosted. He reached a narrow passage that required crawling on hands and knees. The narrowest section had a 6-inch wide crevice that dropped vertically into darkness. While maneuvering around it, Bora's flashlight slipped and fell into the crack. He was left in absolute darkness. Without hesitation, he tried to retrieve the flashlight. He lay prone and reached into the crevice. Stretching further, he shifted his weight forward. The limestone walls were polished smooth. As he leaned deeper, gravity took control. He slipped forward and became wedged between the walls. His shoulders and chest were trapped with legs above. Any attempt to push upward only wedged him more firmly. Hours passed in absolute darkness. Without water, dehydration became immediate. As days passed, his condition deteriorated with muscle cramps and difficult breathing. By the third day, Bora descended into complete despair. He seriously considered suicide as preferable to slow death. On the fourth day, his brother organized a search party. About 1,000 feet in, he heard a faint cry. His flashlight revealed Bora wedged in the crevice. Bora was barely responsive after 4 days without food or water. Over 200 rescuers assembled for the extraction. They had to widen the crevice using hand tools carefully. Medical personnel provided fluids during the operation. After 4 days and 17 hours trapped, Bora was pulled free. He was transported to the hospital with dehydration and muscle damage. He avoided serious physical damage but needed months of psychological recovery. Airman's Cave Incident. On the 6th of September 1985, Bart Hudson and David Hoping Gardner entered Airman's Cave near Austin, Texas. Hudson was 25 and Gardner was 24. They planned a short visit, maybe an hour or two. Their wives knew where they were. After exploring, they decided to head back. But caves look different going out than going in. They reached a junction with multiple passages. Which one had they come from? They picked one, but it didn't look right. They backtracked and tried different passages, and they were lost. Hours passed and their lights were getting dimmer. Their wives grew worried when they didn't return for dinner. The wives found the car at the cave and notified authorities. Bill Russell assembled a search team late Saturday night. Hudson and Gardner had been underground for 8 hours or more. The search team entered, calling out names. Hudson and Gardner heard voices and called back, but sound in caves bounces and echoes deceptively. At 2 a.m. Sunday morning, 10 hours after they entered, the search team found them. Here's the tragic and darkly comic detail. Hudson and Gardner were 30 feet from the entrance. For 10 hours, they'd been wandering in darkness, and they were less than 10 meters from where they'd started. The searchers led them out. The route was simple and obvious once you knew which way to go. The two men emerged exhausted and embarrassed, but unharmed. They had gotten lost 30 feet from the entrance. Thunderhole Cave Incident. On July 15, 1995, 2 experienced cave divers prepared for a dive into Thunderhole Cave in Florida. Robert McGuire and Del Mose had planned this dive meticulously over the previous weeks. The dive plan used mixed gas diving with different nitrogen and oxygen mixtures at various depths. 2 separate breathing mixtures had been prepared with clear labels on each tank. One was a standard mix for deeper portions, and another was a 50-50 mix for shallow depths. McGuire had taken Sudafed tablets that morning because his sinuses were bothering him. McGuire and Mose entered the water together shortly after 10 o'clock in the morning. The descent began smoothly through crystal clear water with excellent visibility. At 70 feet below the surface, they reached their first planned waypoint. This was where McGuire should have switched tanks and left the 50-50 mix for later. The 50-50 mixture was perfect for shallow stops, but dangerous at greater depth. But somehow the switch never happened correctly during the routine dive. Perhaps McGuire became disoriented, or maybe the Sudafed affected his mental clarity. He continued his descent with the wrong tank, carrying the 50-50 mix deeper. Mose had no reason to question his partner's gas management decisions. Each diver was responsible for their own gas selection in technical diving. They continued downward through increasingly narrow passages in the cave. At 140 feet below the surface, they reached their planned maximum depth. The pressure at this depth was more than 5 times the pressure at sea level. McGuire's regulator delivered the 50-50 mix smoothly with nothing feeling wrong. But the 50-50 mix that was safe at 70 feet had become deadly poison at 140 feet. Oxygen itself becomes toxic to the human nervous system under too much pressure. McGuire and Mose spent approximately 15 minutes at maximum depth exploring. Everything seemed normal as both divers checked their dive computers regularly. Then they began the long ascent with careful decompression stops at various depths. They were somewhere around 70 feet when everything went catastrophically wrong. Without any warning, McGuire's body went completely rigid in the water. His regulator fell from his mouth as violent convulsions seized his entire frame. His arms jerked wildly and his legs kicked in random directions. Mose spun around and watched his friend thrashing uncontrollably in horror. He lunged forward trying to stabilize McGuire and get the regulator back. But oxygen toxicity seizures are nearly impossible to manage underwater. McGuire's jaw clenched tight, making it impossible to hold the regulator. Water flooded into McGuire's lungs with each involuntary gasp for air. Mose struggled desperately against his friend's thrashing limbs trying to help. McGuire's lungs filled with water and oxygen deprivation claimed his brain. The thrashing stopped and McGuire went limp in the water as dead weight. Mose held his friend's body, knowing it was already too late to help. Now Mose faced the nightmare scenario every dive buddy fears. His partner was dead. Mose secured his friend's body and completed his own decompression stops. Each minute was an agony of grief and shock for the surviving diver. When he finally surfaced hours later alone, the full weight crashed down on him. His friend had died from a simple mistake of using the wrong tank at the wrong depth. Tóbari Bay Incident. On January 5th, 2023, an experienced diver descended into the waters off the coast of Mexico. The waters are rich with sea life, providing abundant catches of fish and shellfish. Manuel Nablas Lopez was 53 years old and very experienced in diving these waters. He had spent decades diving to significant depths, harvesting various species of shellfish. Lopez was a professional who understood the ocean and respected its dangers. On this particular morning, Lopez was part of a small crew harvesting axe scallops. These scallops live on the seafloor at significant depths in the Gulf. Lopez was using a surface-supplied air system connected to the boat by a long hose. This system allowed him to stay underwater for extended periods without running out of air. The plan was straightforward: descend to the seafloor between 36 to 59 feet deep. His companions would remain on the support vessel above managing his air supply. As Lopez descended that morning, the water conditions were less than ideal. The visibility was relatively murky, making it harder to see potential dangers. Lopez was working near the seafloor, moving among schools of fish, searching for scallops. He was wearing a black wetsuit, which is standard equipment for divers. His movements through the water created vibrations that predators could detect from far away. What Lopez and his crew didn't know was that they weren't alone that morning. Somewhere in the murky waters below, a massive great white shark was cruising the area. This particular shark was enormous, estimated to be about 19 feet long. A 19-foot great white shark weighs around 2,000 to 2,500 pounds. These are apex predators that have perfected their hunting techniques for millions of years. The shark struck Lopez with immense force, closing its jaws around his upper body. This was a full predatory strike from one of the ocean's most powerful predators. The crew members on the support vessel had no warning. Anything was wrong. They felt unusual tension in the line and began pulling Lopez back to the surface. When they pulled Lopez's body up, the scene was something out of a nightmare. Their colleague had been destroyed by the shark attack with massive injuries. It was immediately clear that he was dead. The entire attack unfolded in a matter of seconds, possibly less than 5 seconds. There was no prolonged struggle or opportunity to fight back or escape. By the time they pulled Lopez up, there was nothing that could be done. Marine biologists confirmed Lopez's injuries were consistent with a great white shark bite. Turkey Cave Incident. On October 15, 1994, 6 experienced spelunkers entered Turkey Cave in Virginia with special permission. Turkey Cave sits in Rockbridge County and had been close to explorers for several years. Benjamin Schwartz, John Murray, Bob Thrun, Janice and Tony Preston, and Ted Andrus entered to conduct a survey. The group made their way through the entrance passages that quickly widened into the big room. From the big room, they entered a passageway leading to a 15-foot drop to the lower level. Only a few feet into this passage, Janice Preston suddenly developed a breathing problem. She started gasping for air with her chest tightening as she struggled to get oxygen. Janice pushed through a tight constriction and dropped into a small room on the other side. She finally managed to catch her breath in the confined chamber. The group decided her medication from earlier that morning probably caused her breathing problem. They decided decided to continue with the survey, thinking it was just a minor issue. Then John Murray mentioned something that should have been a major warning sign. His carbide lamp was having trouble staying lit. Other members started noticing the same problem with their lamps flickering and dimming. Benjamin Schwartz reached the rigging point for the 15-foot drop, but had trouble catching his breath. He noticed the carbide lamps were burning with an unusual yellow color. They were in bad air. Bad air in caves is invisible, odorless, and kills by depleting oxygen from your blood. Everyone in the group began experiencing severe trouble breathing simultaneously. Schwartz made the call that they needed to exit the cave immediately. Ted Andrus was hit particularly hard by the bad air. His thinking became severely impaired as oxygen deprivation affected his brain. Andrus's condition continued to decline as they moved through the passages. His movements became slower and more uncoordinated. The others realized Andrus was on the edge of losing consciousness completely. If he passed out in the narrow passages, getting him out would be impossible. Bob Thrun and Tony Preston positioned themselves on either side of Andrus. They began essentially dragging him through the passages toward better air. The other members were barely managing to keep themselves moving forward. Every minute felt like an hour as they struggled toward the big room. They could feel themselves getting weaker with vision starting to tunnel. Andrus was fading in and out of consciousness as they dragged him forward. Finally, after desperate struggle, the group reached the big room. The air quality in the larger chamber was dramatically better. Everyone started gulping air as their lungs finally got adequate oxygen. Andrus slowly began to recover as his blood oxygen levels returned to normal. The group sat in the big room for an extended period to recover. Before leaving, they marked the dangerous passage with clear warning signs.